at Home is a show dedicated to the voices of social justice movements. We bring to you guests who are engaged in making a difference in the lives of those who are often forgotten. We are committed to finding solutions which make people safe and communities thrive. We believe that people have powerful stories about personal transformation. When shared, these stories begin a process of healing. Through these stories, we connect different issues which speak to equity for everyone. I'm your host, Buna Chima. Welcome to Create Peace at Home. In the studio with me today is Paul Bowden, Executive Director of the Western Regional Advocacy Project. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. Hey.
I have known Paul for over 30 years, and we're going to talk with each other about how things are the same and things have changed when it comes to the issues of the civil rights of homeless people and also the right to housing. Paul, I met you first in 1983, I believe, in the Tenderloin.
Yes.
And tell me just really quickly what your journey has been since then.
Well, I mean, since then I was given an opportunity through Central City Hospitality House on Leavenworth Street in the Tenderloin to, as a 23-year-old kid that had been out in the street for a while, to not just be a client of or to be a recipient of, but to actually become a part of. And my first task was, all right, you're 23, you're a white boy from Long Island, you got a decent baseline education. Here's some paperwork, start helping people fill it out, start advocating for the people that you see around you so that people can get into the shelter beds or can get the Social Security that they deserve. And they immediately gave me an opportunity to start getting involved. And that's how I met you.
So was this through Hospitality House?
It was, it was actually, I was on the line. I had done squatting and saw this long line going down Leavenworth Street, around the corner, down Golden Gate. It had seniors, it had kids, it had families, it had single adults. Everybody was just being sent to get on this long line. And those that didn't get into a bed got put on buses. The buses were put up in front of St. Anthony's and in front of the old welfare office. They took the starter mechanisms out so we couldn't steal the buses. And had people literally sleeping on the buses, sleeping on the floor at Hospitality House, sleeping on cots at Salvation Army, on church pews at Episcopal. This was the early 80s. Homelessness was still a crisis. It was still seen as an emergency. And you were working in that mental health program in the SROs for all the people that were being deinstitutionalized and the people that were being cut out of the halfway houses and the lodges. And so naturally, our paths crossed, and that was literally 30 years ago.
So looking back, when I look back during that time, and it seemed, at least on our side of the bay, it seemed that the level of understanding, empathy, and tolerance for those of our folks who were in the streets was much, much higher, even though the behaviors on the streets aren't that different now than they were then. But it seems that the whole country has somehow took a turn somewhere and decided that people really didn't have a right to exist, so we're going to start hauling them off the streets and putting them in jail or find other ways to basically make people disappear.
I would especially say I think that it was a we thing back then. And there was this serious recognition, because it had just happened, that what's broken with this system? Like, why is it suddenly so many of the people that might have used the mailroom or might have used the bathroom or the drop-in center or the play chess? That's what Hospitality House did. It was a place for people that lived in SROs to hang out during the day. And they would close at 11 o'clock at night. St. Anthony's would feed people during the day, going back to the 50s. Those things were there. Yeah, poverty was there. But those people had a place to go at the end of that day. Hospitality House had historically closed at 11 o'clock, and people went home. And that's from 1969 to 1982.
So when you say people went home,
they went to their SROs, they went to the hotels and the TL. I mean, it was a neighborhood center.
Yeah.
But they went home. And in October of 82, November of 82, and then clearly by 83, more and more of the people at 11 o'clock when the house would shut down for the day were saying, I got nowhere to go. Mm-hmm. And it became a crash pad. It was like, well, you're a neighbor. You're a part of my community. Crash here. And that's how it was seen.
Yeah, and it was similar in Berkeley, starting even in 1971, because I was here then, you hadn't showed up. There were always, pressures on any of us providing services to try to make it kind of difficult for people to be on the street, even though your job was to provide social services. Somehow, along with that, also came this little nudge from whether it was the city or, the
around eligibility, and whether you're worthy
whatever.
enough.
And in Berkeley, at least, the earlier sweeps used to be around the drug issue, and at that time, the drug of choice was heroin, and we know we've come a long ways from there. At what time have you seen, at any time in all your efforts in San Francisco, and I do want to talk about how the San Francisco Coalition for the Homeless began, and what an awesome journey that has been for many people. But take us through the ebbs and flows of this, we're friendly towards the homeless, we don't want them in our streets. It seemed like every time a mayor changes in San Francisco, the entire policy stuff gets shook up.
Well, but I think, Feinstein was the first to use bulldozers to sweep a homeless encampment, and that was in 85, somewhere around there, early 85. As soon as there was a recognition that this wasn't an overnight phenomenon, and as soon as there was a sort of, very quickly, after homelessness started, the city formed, Feinstein loved blue ribbon task forces. She does blue ribbon task forces on everything. Yeah. And she formed a blue ribbon task force on homelessness. And it was actually chaired by the mayor's criminal justice system, which I think says a lot. I mean, it really tells you what that this is about what the impact these people are having on us. But there was this sort of recognition that, and even up until 87, when the Stewart-McKinney Act was passed, that this was a housing issue, that this was in response to massive cuts to affordable housing funding. And the hardest people to house were families. And today we just redefined them out of even qualifying as being homeless anymore. Right. And we can get to that later. But I mean, if you were an SSI recipient or senior citizen as a frontline service provider in the early 80s, a week at the most. And I could get you a room somewhere. I could get you a decent hotel room in a hotel program, Section 8, subsidized housing for seniors somewhere. That is gone.
So besides the numbers, and the numbers seem to have changed each decade, and a different set of folks seems to show up. In the 70s, it was mostly people who were white, they were younger, they were coming up out of Napa State Hospital, and they were mixing in with everybody else that was in the streets in the 70s. And the issue didn't really become serious until the 80s, and at least for our side of the Bay, what the crack epidemic did to our community, and how many people did become homeless because of that particular epidemic. Did you see similar things happening in San Francisco?
I started at Hospitality House in January of 83. They had actually started being the main entry point to the shelter system in October of 82. And that's when San Francisco's homeless program officially started. It was at that point that the city said, okay, we need a system because there's just so many people out there. So you can imagine that was in response to stuff that had been going on leading up to that, but not by years, really by months. It wasn't until 87 that the Fed said, oh, okay, we got an issue. And that was really the beginning of the end of homelessness as a systemic issue. Like, we could, people love to in the early days talk about deinstitutionalization. And they didn't like to talk about shutting down the halfway houses and the lodges,
right,
because that was minutia. But the tagline of deinstitutionalization, well, I mean, Greyhound therapy been around for a while. That was,
and deinstitutionalization without something in the community to go to.
And it's just, almost like there was like this
cruelty.
collective misrecognition of the fact that there was even a system in place. And because it was so short-lived. And there are remnants of it now, but very few and very far between in terms of any precept. Now they call it supportive housing or something, where you get a case manager with 58 SRO tenants suffering severe mental illness, and you wonder why it's not working. Because you have no treatment on that other end. And the fact that...
And also, we're not creating communities in the places that people are ending up in, especially folks that are coming out of shelters. When they get their first place, they go into shock. There's not enough support for them that will keep them from returning back into the streets.
Well, yeah,
I think that community peace that existed in the streets, where people looked out for each other, and the camaraderie that the workers had with each other, and it seemed like we were more on the same page in the earlier times. And then when the federal government stepped in, we started to build this homeless empire. We being, the entire country kind of started to see this as a real opportunity on both sides, building a system, but also getting some people housed. And I'm talking about some people, because we haven't solved the problem, of course.
Yeah, and I think like when we created the Community Housing Partnership through the Homeless Coalition with this Council of Community Housing Organizations, like our big vision was to build community amongst the tenants, but a big part of that was being able to hook up which tenants that might need it into actual treatment. Like whether it be community-based substance abuse treatment programs or community-based mental health programs. In the 60s, as much as I feel like the war on poverty totally neoliberalized the poverty complex, I also feel that the one good thing that came out of that whole war on poverty was the community health center concept. That you put community,
I would have to agree with you.
That those centers, whether it be substance abuse treatment, mental health treatment, or medical treatment, those centers were there to serve that community. Those things have been decimated. Absolutely. So how do you take a community of people that are coming from the streets, are therefore logically all poor, because the days of the millionaire homeless person, 30
by
years,
choice,
30 years, it just ain't there. The $200 a day panhandler that the Chronicle loves to talk about don't freaking exist.
Right.
So you have a people of poverty as their core, and that have a substance abuse issue or have a mental health issue or are just lacking employment opportunities or want to go get a GED like I did or whatever. And none of those systems are in place. So you've created the SRO unit.
Or if they are in place, they're broken.
If they're not accessible.
They're not accessible.
More and more
they're not accessible.
And so you can pretend that being number 301 on a 300-person waiting list means the services are available.
Yeah.
They're not accessible. And it's a game.
For Berkeley Mental Health, that is so true.
Yeah.
That you really, unless you're in an absolute crisis and you're going to get 5150, the other services that were in place, people could walk in on the same day and get to see somebody. Now, the waiting lists are unbelievable. And the pressure on the systems, the few that are still in the community, is at a place where they're...
and our public housing system
as far as I'm
concerned,
the waiting list. They're shut down. And if you got in, it's fine, but if you didn't, then you just have to
and it's
wait
always
and see.
it's amazed me. I've worked with the National Healthcare for the Homeless Council, which is a great organization in the concept that they really believe healthcare is a human right. And they've added to that campaign that housing is a human right, and that housing is healthcare.
Which is unfortunate that the housing expert and the housing folks didn't very quickly recognize that this was also a public health issue and start to work together.
Yeah, it's been a struggle.
It's been a real struggle.
And just last week was the 25-year anniversary of McKinney. How anybody could celebrate that is beyond me. Without McKinney, we might have actually had the housing that created the crisis in the first place. And I'm not saying that housing, lack of housing created racism or classism or substance abuse or mental illness. No, it didn't. What it did create was homelessness. Because we still have a lot of issues in this country to deal with. Yeah. And race and class being at the forefront of that. Which because so much of the other things
really
that play
gets
out.
Talked about.
The criminalization numbers, just the way that we now make it illegal to sit or to loiter, and who gets targeted by stop and frisk or by loitering campaigns or jaywalking campaigns. I mean, really, when you look at a lot of this, the core of it is the race and class issues in this country.
Profiling is well amongst the work that is.
And it goes to the ugly laws of the 1860s or the Operation Wetback of the 50s or the anti-Okie laws of the 30s or the Jim Crow laws. I mean, we have a long, sordid, sorry history. And now we call it broken windows, or we call it public commons, I guess, here in Berkeley. And, quality of life in other places. But
talking about quality of life, we rarely talk about the quality of life of the people who are on our pavements. We want to talk about the quality of life of the people who are living in the hills and the little discomfort that they might feel when they come into our downtowns. I don't even understand why we're doing this in Berkeley, why there's going to be a measure on the ballot in November that we actually get to vote whether people can sit on the sidewalk or not. You had a battle recently in San Francisco, and can you speak to that for a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, but it was the same thing. I mean, we've outlawed sleeping in the parks. We close our parks at night. You know, we've outlawed loitering. We've outlawed trespassing. You know, we've had, and like, I mean, aggressive enforcement of these seemingly chump change laws that have been on the books forever. And now we've started adding new laws to the books. And so panhandling wasn't good enough. Now it's aggressive panhandling, or, you know, laying down, or sleeping. Like, the act of sleeping is illegal? No, we can't do that. So we call it camping. Yeah. I'm telling you right now, homeless people don't go camping. They go to sleep. You know, like it's just
they
such a misnomer.
They sometimes go to sleep because one of the biggest concerns is the sleep deprivation and the connection of sleep deprivation then to other behaviors that one exhibits when you haven't slept for days.
And just like with sundown towns, the people that we all look at, or those that live indoors look at and say those are the people that are there to protect us, are the very people that homeless people have to run away from. And that was true with the Jim Crow laws, that was true with the ugly laws, that was true with the sundown towns, that the very people that society has created and empowered and armed to be able to protect us are the same people that certain segments of our society are forced to run and hide from, which makes you vulnerable to all kinds of abuse.
And it's more and more people joining that group. It's immigrants, it's homeless folks, it's, you know, you're not the right color, we're going to stop you, we're going to look for your documentation. So this whole notion of that there are people that don't belong is very, very serious.
And the whole notion that if we as a society don't learn from our history, we really, really are bound to repeat it. And when you really look back at it and you look at all of the laws and when they were created, San Francisco was the first city to pass the ugly law. And the ugly law says if you are maimed, deformed, or disabled to the point of being deemed unsightly, it is illegal for you to be in public space and on a public way. That law was passed from city to city, just like we're seeing with the sit-lie laws, just like we're seeing with the panhandling parking meters or any of that other stupid crap that is floating around as solutions to the impact of homeless people on the good citizens with money to spend. It spread from city to city, you know, and it wasn't over. The final ugly law wasn't taken off the books till 1972 in Chicago. I'm not saying it was being enforced up until that point, but it wasn't actually. From 1867 to 1972, there were still municipalities in this country that made it illegal, had a law on the books that made it illegal for you to be disabled and be in public space.
Let me take you to the San Francisco Coalition for the Homeless, because you were there for 15 years.
Something like that, yeah, close.
You were
16,
there
yeah.
a while and did some incredible work and created some models of how to get organizing done, how to have impact. Could you share that story with us, please, the story of the coalition and
yeah, it was an attempt.
And how it's doing now?
It was an intent. The best part is it's kicking more butt now than it ever has. So I mean that's how you know we
didn't miss that.
You know, and it's celebrating its 25th anniversary in November of this year for an organization that would not be considered the mainstream. It's incredible that it survived 25 years. And it was created because we noticed right away, once Feinstein did her Blue Ribbon Task Force, and we got really, several organizations that I was lucky enough to be a part of, got really uptight about McKinney when it first passed in '87, especially this concept that they were promoting then. Now it's housing first, back then it was transitional housing.
Right.
That just seemed asinine to us. Like, why would you have a place and call it housing? And the staff get to stay forever,
right?
But the tenant has to move. It just made no sense at all to us. So we decided to, and we looked at the welfare system. The workers hate the clients hate the workers. Very easy system to dismantle. The public housing system, the workers hate the clients hate the workers. Very easy system to dismantle. We noticed with the Blue Ribbon Task Force that it was the service providers that were meeting with the mayor and not the homeless people.
Yeah,
and we felt
San Francisco
and we feared,
was known for that.
We feared this concept that we were going to divide and conquer the homeless community. And we actually, you know, there's just too many examples to mention, but we actually had an instance where at one point there was the Homeless Welfare Task Force, and there was the Service Providers Coalition, and then there was the Homeless Service Providers Network, and then there was
and
the
you had to go to all the meetings.
Well, if they were going to talk about us, we were
course.
going to crash their stuff. And we refused to let them talk about homeless people without reps of homeless people. And that also forced us, and I think what is to this day, I know the core of the coalition, because Jennifer Friedenbach was part of making the coalition what it is. It sure as hell was not a one-man show. Is that we have to do outreach into the shelters, we have to do outreach into the streets. That if you're going to say we, you know, we're going to look behind you and say, who's we? Who's this we you keep talking about? And if you can't document who we is, then shut up. Because poor people got too many leaders as it is.
Yes,
they don't need to
absolutely.
be told what time it is. They don't need to be told what to think, or who their enemy is, or who their ally is. They'll figure that stuff out for themselves. What they need is an organization to help build a voice so that what they have figured out for themselves now resonates. And that's where the street newspaper movement came from. That's where our attempt to, you know, make the street sheet in San Francisco a voice of the organizing and the organization that was the Homeless Coalition.
Were there times when the service providers felt threatened by the power of the voice that was coming out of San Francisco Coalition? Because that's what I remember, is service providers sort of being nervous. And to me, that didn't make any sense at all, because...
Well, except that one of the first...
You know, you weren't like going to take their paychecks away. You were just trying to make them do things differently.
No, but also, and I'm glad that we did it this way, but only because it was so responsive. Like, we all came out of the system, and we knew that there was no due process rights to appeal decisions that impacted your life, mainly being kicked out of the shelter.
Yeah.
And why you were allowed to be kicked out, and your ability to appeal that decision. And when they could kick you out right away, and when they could say to you, we're kicking you out, but here's your appeals process, and you can stay pending an appeal. That was one of our first big projects. And it took us from being a cute little group of homeless people that were forming something with our allied service providers.
Cute, because you guys were pretty rowdy.
We didn't get away with the cute for very long. But at the very outset, it was, oh, isn't this darling, you know? And we had, you know, our service provider allies that we've always had, as first and foremost, Swords to Plowshares, Hospitality House.
Absolutely.
You know, these guys come from a community base. They have never been threatened or intimidated, and in fact have used the coalition as a support system in what they're doing. Others, you know, it waxes and wanes. But when we took on an appeals process, which I still think is the only one in the country outside of New York where they have a right to shelter in their constitution, an appeals process for people being kicked out, almost all the shelter providers said, yeah, we think that should be in place, but it shouldn't apply to us. We would never treat people that way. And I think that, you know, it really taught me a lot that that's how they see it.
As a shelter provider, I remember all of that.
Yeah, and it was like, yeah, that's important. People should have their rights protected, but the program doesn't need to apply to us because we would never treat people that way. And it quickly dawned on them that you can't have it both ways. Either the system respects these rights or the system doesn't.
Yeah.
And so, you know, here we were with a 30,000 a month street newspaper that we were putting out, with instituting an appeals process that was run out of the coalition for people that were being kicked out of the shelters, and doing citation defense and working against the criminalization.
So at what time did you get to a place in your life where you felt that maybe the coalition could now, that it would still be a powerful coalition, which all of us knew it would, and you made the move to start the Western Regional Advocacy Project, which I thought was absolutely brilliant?
There were two steps in that. One was, I think that by year 10, 11, I knew the coalition, and I probably stayed a little too long at the coalition, to be honest about it. I was pretty burnt the last year I was there. But I think by 11 or 12 for sure, the coalition, it was more like how weird it would be me leaving as opposed to it would screw the place up me leaving. And the thing was, you had to embrace it was going to be a different place. Because when you're part, well, you might know this. You know, when you're part of helping to create this thing, a lot of your personality is in it. And the personality of the coalition is very different today than it was when I was there. And it took probably both sides a year to realize that's okay. That's how it's supposed to be. It is painful,
transition
though, but
is painful.
You know, you know. The idea for what became RAP was mainly because of hard-headed allies like you guys and LA Can, in the sense that Atlanta, New York, Chicago, these are the coalitions from these places, and San Francisco were all on the board of directors of the National Coalition for the Homeless.
I remember, yes.
And we wrote a concept paper, mainly Chicago, New York, and San Francisco, wrote a concept paper together that said, let's set up regional offices around the country and do the National Coalition organizing work, specifically around civil rights, at the regional level, so that it was easier for local groups to hook in. Same time zone, easier access, easier travel. At that point, and today, all of the staff were in DC. All of the meetings were in DC. So if you were broke like us, you became a scholarship baby of the organization as opposed to an equal partner. Now, granted, with my mouth and stuff, that didn't, the scholarship baby didn't go over too well. But they said no. And because part of it was we wanted the regional entities to choose their board reps. And so it would change how people got onto the board. The staff felt threatened because, well, if the regional offices exist, what about my position?
Right.
And the board of directors felt threatened because, well, what if they don't choose me? And so we underestimated that, and it got shot down. It got voted down pretty quick. But when I came back home and told everybody that it got shot down, none of you cared. It was like,
we were like, so what?
Know? And I'll never forget our first meeting when I think it was Pete White from LA Ken said, I'm not coming and being a part of this if we're going to sit around and talk about what they're doing to us. We're going to create our own voice. Because there was some hurt feelings, on my part especially probably, so I was probably whining or whatever. But, you know, there was something like, yeah, they didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, so what if they didn't want to do it? Do we want to do it? You know,
and we wanted to do it.
That attitude of, just decide what you want to do and then create the resources to pull it off.
And that's what I've admired about you ever since I've known you, is once you know you're going to do something and you know it's the thing to do and it's supported by the folks, you know, that we're talking about, the we, then
it's
you
going to
move
happen.
like a force and make it happen.
And it might take, you know, like where I screw up, or any of us screw up, is we put a 6-month time frame on it or a 1-year time frame. And that's the grant mentality.
Right.
You know, that's just having written way too many freaking grants.
For way too little money.
You know, And then they still say, well, your goals and objectives and, you know, all that crap. But, you know, when you're able to say, this is the direction we're moving in, and it might take us a year, it might take us 2 years, who knows, we might get it done in a month. But this is the direction we are moving in, and you've documented the we. You know who the we is, and you know that you've set up communication systems where people can really plug in. And you just do it, you know? And
So what do you see as the key pieces of work that RAP is doing with its coalition partners?
Certainly the artwork is a major, and that I think ties into the messaging.
Yeah,
and
I thought it
Huffington
was
Post
very
blog
smart when the decision was made to add the art to the reports.
Yeah.
And we have at least one of the pieces here, which is done by Art, I think.
Yeah, it's Art Hazelwood.
Yeah.
Who's now the Minister of Culture of RAP.
Of RAP, of course. And then we have some other charts. I thought it might be interesting to bring them up and maybe go through a couple of them.
Absolutely.
And then also continue to talk about the importance of art on social justice and in organizing.
Yeah, because I think that the artwork in terms of the messaging that as a tool in many cities simultaneously, the outreach and compiling the outreach into the fact sheets, and our ability to really put out non-biased drafts of bills and bring that out to communities and not say you should like this or you should support this or you should oppose it, but say this is what it says, what do you want us to say in response?
This is the information.
And it gave us so much credibility because everybody's always told what they should think.
I wanted to start with this one because we don't think of rural homelessness very much at all, being such urbanites. So I thought it might be, if you would tell us what's going on here.
There's two issues going on. I mean, one is this is tracking the number of units that were built. So we had charts, just regular charts like you would see in a report, of all of the information that was then turned into artwork. This particular piece was done by a gentleman named Ed Gould. And so we gave him the data that we had collected, and we gave him the chart, and we said, make this chart, if you would, make this into something that somebody might actually put on their wall. Because the information's all there. But people aren't going to hang a chart on their freaking wall.
Yeah,
you know, it's like they're just not going to do it. Everybody will think they're a nerd, and they'll walk away from them. So he created this piece of artwork to dramatize and to give life to the data that is found in the report. And rural groups absolutely loved the fact that their issues, and you notice with all of the HUDs, all of the RAP materials, it talks about HUD and USDA. Because most people don't know rural housing was actually funded through the New Deal era programs through the United States Department of Agriculture.
This one is one of my favorites because it just speaks
this was the cover, too.
Poignantly as to what really happened.
And also...
and that it ties in with oil, which I thought
was but it's public housing funding. And if anybody thinks that you can separate out public housing from homelessness, you're wrong. If you look at the decimation in affordable housing funding for public housing programs and the opening of emergency shelters, like you'll notice in all of these, 83 was a bad year.
It was a bad year.
It's when Reaganomics became standard operating procedure. The neoliberal approach to addressing poverty became the way that we do it, Democrat or Republican. And Clinton,
and we're still doing
was definitely a neoliberal approach to addressing these issues. And that was a really bad year. And that's when we opened all of our shelters. And that's why you see the homeless family coming out of the ruins of the decimation of affordable housing funding.
Okay, we have one more here. Oh, this one's homeowners versus the affordable housing assistance. And being a homeowner, I know that I get the largest tax relief than folks who are not homeowners. It's like a giveaway the federal government gives to me. And
actually, homeowners get the largest housing subsidy of anybody in the country. And I'm talking $144 billion in homeowner housing subsidies. And we keep, with poor people, we call it charity.
Right.
And we put in community service regulations, and we screen out felony convictions, and we screen out behavior and one strike and immigrant rights status. With homeownership, none of that applies.
No, absolutely
and
not.
It's $144 billion. Affordable housing is $38 billion. And again, you're looking at 1983. It's when those two programs shifted. It used to be in the $40 billion area for affordable housing, I mean, for home ownership deductions, and around 70-something billion for affordable housing funding. And they crossed, the Reaganomics hit, and the two lines cross right around that same period of time and get more and more divergent as we go along. That means a loss of jobs. That means a loss of housing. That means the advent of contemporary homelessness. While 75% of the money goes to households earning over $200,000 a year. So you're doing housing subsidies for those that can afford not to need a housing subsidy, while you're eliminating housing subsidies and putting people out in the street. And then criminalizing the fact that they're in the street.
I wanted us to talk a little bit about some of the actions that we've done.
Oh, and this was Josh Sands, by the way.
And also, if you would like to mention who the other members are, RAP besides Boss.
All right, so we'll start. So we got Sisters of the Road, Street Roots, and Right to Survive in Portland. We got SHOCK, the Sacramento Homeless Organizing Committee in Sacramento. We've got St. Mary's Center in Oakland, Street Spirit, which whose office is in San Francisco, but the paper is East Bay, out of American Friends Service Committee in Boss over here. We got the San Francisco Coalition, and now a couple of other groups that are joining from San Francisco. And then the Los Angeles Community Action Network, and then we have some allied groups in Fresno that we're going to be bringing in pretty soon.
Talk a little bit about you know, the gathering that we had that lasted 3 days, the work that came out of that, and the direction that RAP is headed in.
Well, and
what's next?
What I love about the gatherings, first of all, is that, I mean, these are not all the same, these groups. No. You know, they're all the same in terms of they're hardcore, been around for a while. None of them just got on the block. Although that's not even true now with Right to Survive and stuff. I mean, some of them are kind of new now, so we're growing.
But they've done the work.
But they've
done
some
work.
You know, they're serious. And it did take us some time to build the trust, to build the way that we make our decisions into like where everybody felt like, you know, I had my input. And if the group decided, then that's what the group's going to do. And now our meetings the last several years have just been really cool in the fact that there's healthy discussions, but there's no backstabbing. There's healthy debates, but there's no, oh, F you, or any of that kind of stuff. It's like...
Or one debate in one room and other debates in other rooms.
The behind the cigarette break talking smack is just, that's gone.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And it means that you're growing a healthy entity, you know, because if we were all the same, we would get nowhere.
Yeah, or if we had the same ideas, we wouldn't get anywhere.
Right, and there would be boring meetings. So the meetings are anything but boring. And we come out of it with really clear next steps. And we're getting better at being realistic about how much of those steps we can achieve, you know, in prioritizing those steps. But, you know, now we're rolling out the organizer's toolkit with the Without Housing, so we'll never have to write another Without Housing
Describe report. A little bit about the housing report that came out, and then the toolkit that has come out of that, and how communities can access that and use it
Well,
to
and
educate further.
And just like everything with RAP, all of our information is on our website, and all of our information is free. Information does nobody any good sitting on our shelf.
And that's just rap.org?
Raphome.org.
Raphome.org.
And WRAPHOME.org. And you can go and look at our publications. You can go and look at our allies' publications that they made available.
Yeah, it's
you
an
can
incredible
look at posters.
site.
You can look at artwork. All of it is available. And we created this report. The very first thing RAP did at that same meeting that we were referencing earlier, which I guess was 80, no, I'm sorry,
90.
was 90.
Had to have been early 90s. 96, 97, somewhere there.
But it's,
all I know is it's a year that I was very
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, okay.
So it had to have been 96 or
Me
97.
and you both know, because it was actually 2006. But the first RAP meeting was, what's our voice? What do we stand for? And we created the first Without Housing report. You know, a bunch of us had been going around with the charts that you saw, minus the artwork, just going around with the data. But the simple correlation that 79 to 82, we wipe out $54 billion a year in affordable housing funding, 83, we open shelters. Connect the dots, you know. And then you look at now 25 years of McKinney planning, it never once addresses that. There's been 500,000 studies of homeless people. No one except Without Housing has really dedicated
just as many plans.
Its energy, God, to what created the situation that we ended up opening those shelters. So the first Without Housing report, with the artwork it connected to it, was like a great shot out the gate.
It really was.
And the response was overwhelming in terms of organizations contacting us, downloading it, using it, we're using it in reports, using it in studies, using it at schools, high schools, colleges, students have used it like crazy. We updated it in 2006, and that was a real concern to some of us because we didn't want to become a group that does a report and then a couple of years later updates it, and then a couple of years later.
I know we would have left.
You know, yeah, it's like who wants to do that? So this last time when we updated it, we also created an organizer's toolkit that will be up on the website. It's got the cliff notes from the report for the students and stuff that want to use it. It's got the fact sheets. It's got media talking points, but it also has a really powerful PowerPoint presentation of 26 slides, tons of artwork, and really lays out how the housing and civil rights issues interconnect, and how the race issues interconnect, and how this is about a social justice movement.
Yeah.
This isn't about a homeless movement, and we're not going to talk about a homeless movement anymore.
Yeah, and it's about human rights.
We're going to talk about people.
It's always been about human
beings.
rights and human beings and people.
And I don't care if you're in an SRO or in a supportive housing program or in a shelter program or in the street or in an urban area or in a rural area or living on a reservation. You're a human being. And we need a government that thinks that healthcare is a priority, that thinks that education is good. Like, why would we want a governance structure that doesn't value us being educated?
Yeah, or us being smart.
Healthy, you know? Yeah, well, that's what it leads you to believe. It's like
that's what
you
it's
look
led me
at
to believe.
The big growth industry is security and prisons. So it's like, well, I don't need you to be healthy and educated if I'm just going to lock you up anyway. You know,
or
how
you be the one who's
educated do you
watching
need to
the
be to sit in a jail cell, right? So we feel that we can start bringing in the immigrant rights organizations, the battered women's organizations, the children's groups, the education groups, and say, you know what, let's all do a social justice movement together. We don't need to have all these separate movements and all these
they're
separate
not
campaigns.
getting us the...
And if the foundations don't like it, the hell with them.
Yeah.
Because people will support it. Individuals will support it.
So talking about people supporting RAP's work, I just want to make a pitch to the folks who are watching. I'm a donor to RAP. I truly believe that this is the work that must be done and must be supported. So please look them up on the website and make a generous gift.
Thank you.
I wanted to get to...
I agree.
the house keys, not handcuffs, was a
Yeah.
brilliant idea. And, you know, marching and getting to Pelosi's office and trying to
Yeah.
get in that door. I want you to share with the audience a little bit of how much you travel, the kinds of people you talk to, the places you show up in, whether wanted or not, and the impact that your voice has on people that are listening.
I don't know what, I mean, I'm told that I do an okay speech and stuff like that. I do get to speak a lot. And Healthcare for the Homeless, that group I mentioned earlier, actually brings me out a lot because I work with their National Consumer Advisory Board as a volunteer. When we first started RAB, they gave us a small grant where I trained them on doing street outreach and doing outreach in the healthcare programs. Using our methodology, and from that we opened our first office, and they have been tight ever since. And so I work a lot with them, and I do get to travel quite a bit, but also mainly the Without Housing Report has really gotten people to contact us and say, can you come and give us a presentation on that? And as it's so, it's so easy for us to say, oh, but it's simple. And yeah, it is simple once you understand
it, right.
But understanding the federal regs and the federal funding trends and the federal policy shifts and how every time the federal government screws over poor people, they create a new program so they can actually say, no, we're doing a RAD as opposed to we're selling off public housing.
Yeah.
Or we're doing choice neighborhoods as opposed to we're criminalizing poor people. So you got to understand that context. And that's where I think the 1998 Contract on America, that was, as we called it, I think they called it Contract with America. Where they actually changed the enabling legislation for public housing to go from the responsibility of the federal government to ensure housing for all of its citizens.
I read that.
We no longer will hold the federal government accountable to not just house all of its citizens, but even a majority of it. So all of a sudden, when you look at that as part of the welfare reform and the Social Security cuts that happened at that time, TANF was created at that time, it makes perfect sense. And it makes perfect sense that the federal government would say, one-for-one replacement, poof, gone, out the door. So Hope 6 gets implemented. And so,
but it's never as much as it was.
And Hope 6 was a displacement program.
Yeah, it
was a straight up displacement program.
It hasn't
and I never forget
well
Clinton saying, yeah, but it means poor people get to live in the same housing complex as wealthier people, so it gives good role models. And he was talking about grown adults. He was talking about parents. And talking about how by them living with higher income people, it gives them a role model. Like, we haven't had
leaders in this country that talk in a way that a human being feels.
Yeah, and
like they're respected, that they're loved, that they're cared for.
And that
it's always about
that
they did something wrong, and now we're going to try to fix it, but
if you're
nobody from the outside can ever fix things.
And it's
or
funny,
people.
In San Francisco is a perfect example. San Francisco loves poor people so long as they're peasants in El Salvador or Guatemala or Nicaragua.
The sanctuary cities,
and then they're noble and brilliant and righteous. But if the poor person's in the doorway of their business, then it's a bum. And the closer poverty is to liberals, to upper middle class liberals, the more dangerous it becomes and the more threatening it is and the less noble it is. And to us, when the reason we do the hobo shows from hobos to street people is because you look at the artwork of the New Deal era and the poor people's backs are up straight. And, because it was about jobs and it was about creating Social Security. It was about creating public housing. It was about what people deserve. And you don't show a balled up little pathetic creature when you're talking about what people deserve as human beings. You show an upright person. And then in the 60s with the war on poverty, everybody got curled up. And it became this united way, we don't know you, but we love you. Why would you love me if you don't know me? What the hell are you talking about? And it became the way to your purse string is through your heart. If I'm going to get into your purse string at all, I want to go through your brain. I don't really want your charity. I want you to engage and understand and realize that this is about millions of people in this country.
Yeah.
And the level of people living in poverty now is over 46 million people. And the federal guidelines of what constitutes poverty is way below what we would live on and consider ourselves poor.
Yeah, well, they have to sort of keep it
for
that
a
way,
family of 4.
so they don't climb down on that ladder of who's
so
really
the numbers
poor
stay
in the
low.
world. Yeah.
You know, and if you look at 46 million people living in the federal definition of poverty, the fact that 3 to 5 million might be out in the street on any given night makes perfect sense. And look at that and understand this is the consequence. This is the consequence of denying educational opportunities, of denying access to health care, of making housing strictly a commodity, and subsidizing the commodification of housing as opposed to access to housing.
So, having been in this 30 years and done the level of thinking that you've done, what needs to happen? You know, we can sit here and say, okay, we need a president who will see people as people.
Yeah.
No, but something, you know, sure, revolution would be good, but we know that's not down the road or very nearby.
But you see, like that's where. I'm sorry.
That's how I feel.
Yeah.
Because of everything that I'm seeing now with the Occupy movement, with that this country is so militarized, and they can pull the troops out on its own people without even thinking about it.
Right.
And start killing and shooting and tear gassing.
Right.
We don't have those weapons to shoot back. And so thank God, uneven sort of, you know, it's like putting your body on the line for justice and then not having any leaders left because they shot them all.
Right.
So it's like a real vacuum of that passion that existed during, you know, some of the leadership that we've had.
And I think what has got to happen, from my perspective, is we need to get over looking for the next leader.
Yeah, we really need to.
And you can't wait for Martin Luther King to come back. You know, you can't wait for Malcolm X to come back. You have to create the environment where people like that can spring forward. But if the environment isn't created that allows for people that have those kind of leadership characteristics to come forward, you're not going to find them. And you're going to get these false demagogues.
Yeah.
And and I honestly believe the last thing poor people need in this country is another freaking leader. They need support staff. And they need to feel a sense of entitlement. I've never, like when I spent a little bit of time over in Europe when I was bouncing around, I met this Danish woman and she was like, this country's mean. Let's go. And we went to Europe for a year. And these kids were squatting in Amsterdam and Berlin and Copenhagen because they felt entitled.
Yeah, Copenhagen, they had their own little city.
Yeah,
Christiania.
I spent quite a bit of time there. And it was all a sense of entitlement. You look at poor people in America today, they get treated like dirt. And they say, well, that's just the way it goes. I mean, that's how they treated my parents, that's how they treated this, that's how they treat, you know. And to invigorate a sense of entitlement, I think is going to be the core. And that's where the education is so vital. That's where the connecting, you know, when we did the 17-city day of action with the U.S.-Canadian Alliance of Inhabitants, where Nashville and Chattanooga and San Francisco and Oakland and all these, you know, where we did 17 cities came together and had a day of action. And now we have a collage showing all the different cities doing their thing.
I saw that.
People felt really
powerful.
jazzed.
Yeah.
You know, and every city I talked to said, you know, at our local rally, our local demo, people felt really jazzed knowing that it was a part of this bigger network. And everybody, it's human nature, likes to be a part of something bigger than themselves. So we create that. We create the environment, something bigger than yourself.
I'm going to have you come back, Paul. I know that for a fact because we barely scratched the surface. But until then, we do have to sort of wrap it up. Just
wrap it up. That was cute.
I thought you might like that.
That was good.
You know, just sort of throw it in. what's for you next?
This is it.
This is it?
This is it. I'm 54
said that
years old
for
at
many,
this point.
many years. This is it. This is it.
No, this is it. This is what I'll be doing for a long time yet.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's great to get up every day and just do what you want, and this is what I want.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we're all so grateful to RAP and your work, and very proud of it, and proud of being a partner with RAP.
Big partner. And
we love you, Paul.
We're proud of it too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. We will be back in about a month. In the studio with me today is Paul Bowden, the Executive Director of Western Region. Is it regional or region?
Regional.
Regional.
We can change it if you want.
It's okay. I'll get it. Western Regional.
Time anyone's ever told me I wasn't talking loud enough. What I was starting to say is we have a dance coming up now that is to give us a spiritual context and the blessings for what we're about to embark on, which is launching a national social justice organizing campaign to stop the criminalization of our communities. Whether we're young kids, whether we're homeless, whether we're migrant workers, whether we're immigrant community folks, whether we're just trying to survive and trying to feed people, we're being criminalized out of our communities, and we got to stop it. We're here at this big district, business improvement district, for a reason. $3 million a year of property tax dollars is collected by these suckers, by the city, given to these suckers that then brag about kicking out 419 homeless people in 1 month. Show a before and after photo of a human being sleeping in a staircase, and then another photo with nobody there, and say, look what wonderful work we do. Look how great we are. We can make human beings disappear like there's some kind of freaking broken window. We say, hell no, we're fighting back. LA, New York, New Orleans, Chattanooga, Nashville, Fresno, California. All of these communities are right now doing the same thing we're doing here, which is saying we're banding together, we're getting our shit together, and we are fighting back.